Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Taylor Pankratz, and this is Behind the Breakaway. Together with my co-host, Jason Barber, this show takes you behind the scenes of leaving your captive broker-dealer firm and explores the world of RIA independence.
All opinions expressed on the podcast by the hosts and guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Uptick Partners. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as a basis for any decisions.
We are back with another episode of Behind the Breakaway. We've got a really cool, unique, special guest here. I'm Jason, and we've got Matt Cole here, the CEO of Strive Asset Management, is here live in the studio with us. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about culture and changing cultures at various firms. And be sure also to tune in if you want to hear more about Strive and what Strive is doing. We just got done recording an episode that's more client-facing, because I think for the advisors that are listening to this, if you're not currently familiar with Strive and what they're doing, you need to listen to this episode or go to, is it strive.com?
Strive.com.
You go to strive.com and learn more about what Strive is doing, because it's really incredible the difference that they're making in the mission that we're on. But I think that for today's episode that's more focused towards advisors, we really want to spend more of our time today just talking a little bit about what financial advisors are experiencing at their firms when they see every single episode of every Breakaway podcast that I've ever listened to, and you ask the financial advisor that's breaking away and going independent, 9.5 out of 10 of them say, well, the culture's changed at the firm. And I just think that nobody really knows how to actually put that into words of what that actually means. And so I think we've spent some time off camera talking about that. And so I'm interested in hearing your story and in your history and where you started and how you got to be the CEO of Strive and the risks that you took. And people, if they've been listening to our podcast, are somewhat familiar with our risks. But I think maybe we could learn a little bit more about that and then talk a little bit about what we have discovered maybe about this idea of changing culture. What is culture? What makes a good culture? And why are these cultures, I think cultures are declining. And so maybe we can spend the next 20 minutes talking a little bit about this, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So when most people start their career, they want to have a job that will provide a stable income for their life, for their future. And oftentimes they also have a sense of purpose for why they might join a certain job. So before I was at Strive, I was at California's pension fund, CalPERS, for 16 years. I started working there right after the financial crisis, and the financial crisis had major implications for public pension funds. They, before the crisis, were more than funded to cover their liabilities. After the great financial crisis, most of them were underfunded. CalPERS was no different. And that problem was very personal for me, because my parents were law enforcement officers. They had their pensions tied to CalPERS. Many of my grandparents did, my uncles did. And I wanted to help fix that problem. So CalPERS, to me, had a sense of purpose as a job of fixing a major retirement crisis for those who served California, including my parents. So I went there saying, I'm going to help maximize value. Joined there. I made a lot of friends. And I think this is something that's pretty similar across many corporations, is that for the past several decades, there were certain things that would tie people together. And for me, there was things like softball tournaments where the entire organization would come together to play a softball tournament, or a golf tournament, or something where you learn to be with other people, create an actual relationship. So it's not just employee one, employee two, but maybe it's my friend, or I understand certain values that they might have, whether that might be aligned with me, whatever those values might be, right? And so that CalPERS was no different. I developed a ton of friendships. And then their culture started to change. And I think this culture shift is very similar. It rhymes with a lot of other places, but the reasons can be different, or the exact circumstances, but they rhyme. And so at CalPERS, In the late 2010s, they stopped the softball tournament. They stopped the golf tournament. And you would ask why, and it would be like, not everyone's an athlete, and we don't want to create certain bonds with just the athletes. It gets them career advantages that someone that doesn't want to play softball wouldn't get. And I'm sitting here, and so then they stopped playing softball, and they stopped doing the golf tournament, and all of these extracurricular events stopped. And it wasn't just sport events. There was other extracurricular events, and almost all of them ceased. And so what happened, and then COVID happened, and you go remote, and you had this basically elimination of the personalization of people at the organization and just become employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. And you started to see divisions come up. And you also obviously saw the rise of ESG and the rise of DEI and the decrease of merit in many organizations. And CalPERS, that was a similar issue that got even bigger than it was beforehand. But you started to lose your sense of purpose that you were there for. And for me, there were several reasons. I also became really obsessed with a lot of the fiduciary duty issues in corporate America that I thought were impacting the returns of index funds much larger than the alpha that I was able to provide in my individual portfolio. And I started looking. I said, I don't know if I actually want to spend my career here. I don't feel connected here. I don't feel happy here. If that culture would have never changed and I was just happy there, I had a sense of purpose, I had connections with people, I might never have looked. I might have. I don't know. But for sure, whatever corporation you're talking about, when the culture degrades, you might start to look. And for me, it was this sense of purpose of trying to fix this problem. I ended up leaving, joining Strive, and Strive is trying to reinstate American capitalist principles across all the largest companies in America, reinstate meritocracy through our ETFs as an asset manager, and took a risk. And I think this is something that we've talked about a lot, is that when you leave a secure job, and that's what most people have in larger organizations, you have a somewhat secure job, you leave it to reinstate your sense of purpose, reinstate a sense of culture connection, that it's a risk. But I find that for most people that take that jump, that they tend to end up doing better.
So did you feel, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that's, our stories line up, and that's why I think I feel a sense of friendship and connection with you, because I feel like our stories line up so much, and that you've talked about leaving that stable job and taking a pay cut and taking a risk to do what you thought was the right thing to do, which is pretty much exactly what our story is as well, and what I think many people that are listening to this will feel the same way. And so I'll share my thoughts maybe on this. I've given a lot of thought to this idea of, specifically at our prior firm, the culture change. In this idea as financial advisors, you constantly hear this idea of like, well, the culture's changing, the culture's changing. And then people in management fight back against that, and they say, well, no, the culture is not changing, or if you don't like the culture, then you can just leave, or whatever the other things are that they say. But I still think that up until literally not maybe even just a few minutes ago, I'm not sure that I could really put my finger on what that really meant, when you could sense it and you could feel it. But unlike, you've been able to, I think, clearly explain some examples of concrete things and saying, hey, this is where I saw the culture change. And I think for me, it was a lot of very little small things that happen over the years, where maybe it would be just small things like, hey, we used to say a prayer at dinner at our regional meetings, and now you can't. And that example, I'll share that story. I'll never forget being at a summer regional meeting, and one of the other financial advisors on the leadership team brought that up, and they said, who's saying the prayer at dinner tonight? And it was quiet in the room, and everybody was looking around at each other like, who's the person that is saying the prayer? And then the area leader chimed in and said, well, nobody's saying the prayer. We're not going to say a prayer at dinner tonight. And it was like the most awkward, quiet, probably 15 seconds of silence in the room while everybody was, is this actually happening? Like, is anybody going to say something? Is anybody going to actually stand up for what they believe in? And nobody did. And why did nobody stand up for what they believe in? Because everybody in the room felt like, this is kind of messed up. And nobody did, because nobody felt like they could truly say what they felt without risking their career effectively, right? And so I think that it just dawned on me, it's not that we're not saying prayer, right? That's my personal values. My personal values may be that I think I want to say a prayer at dinner, and that's my personal beliefs. And there's countless other examples, right? This is just one example. But I think the bigger issue is this idea that there's this feeling that you better not disagree, okay? Because if you disagree or you speak up, especially where you don't own your business, you can be terminated, and you're risking a lot, okay, to speak your mind. And so there's this sense that you can't actually talk about or share your own feelings. And I think that is ultimately what degrades culture, right? Is not having this sense. And we talked a little bit about you and your skills and Vivek and all of that, just like that takes you've got to have good leaders to be able to field a diverse set of opinions, but let everybody feel that, hey, you know what? Your opinion matters. Speak your mind, and there is no negative. You're not getting fired because you disagree, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And we've talked about a few different things while we've been here, and one of them being, why is this happening? And why does it happen when you might feel it if you're an employee of a company? Why does it happen at the actual managerial executive level? And one of those reasons, in my belief, why it happens is when corporations move away from their founder. And when you think about a founder that builds up a great big business, and there's obviously thousands of great businesses that have been built up in America, those founders tend to have a great grasp of core first principles, meaning the basic principles on which you build a great business in whatever vertical that we're talking about. They understand those things very well. And culture tends to be a core component of any great startup that is built up. And so you recruit this close-knit group of people. We have it now at Strive. I'm sure you have it as well in your startup that come together. There's this mission, there's this sense of purpose, people working hard, close together with culture, develop friendships. And then the founder leaves and you have another person from management or outsource that comes in, and it's not that they're evil, but they didn't build something up from scratch and understand all the different components that came in, this recipe that got put together. And then they start to take away the culture, and they start to. It'd be one thing to just remove culture at all, but what you most commonly see in corporate America is actually a small set of values that are acceptable, and those values tend to be left-leaning ESG, DEI values, and so if you agree with those values, great. If you don't, you either can be quiet or you can speak up, and there might be no consequences, or you might be fired. And so people have to think of like, am I willing to risk it, or do I want to leave and take a risk because I do not feel comfortable being silenced or being in this sort of a culture as a company. And oftentimes when you have one person stand up, you then quickly see that you're surrounded by people that feel exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you are more than likely. It's just that you've lost that ability to even really share. If you feel a sense of fear of even being able to be yourself with your peers, right? Because you're in this like, who can I trust, et cetera, because it's just the culture has degraded so much that it's a terrible thing. And it's shocking how fast it can happen. That's what's unfortunate about it is it does not take long. It can happen. Culture can be degraded in a number of 2, 3, 4 years, can go from being something really special to not. And so.
Yeah, in the past podcast, we talked about Boeing, that literally this degradation at Boeing happened over 5 years, started in 2019. Yeah. And before that, you literally had one of the best performing American corporations in the entirety of the S&P 500.
Yeah. Wow. It's it's just an interesting thing when you've lived it and you've seen it. And so I have another question. I don't even think I've ever even asked you this. So tell me about how you actually, like logistically, you ended up in Strive. Did you know somebody, Vivek, or was it Anson that you knew, or was it?
I actually didn't know any of them at the time.
Yeah.
So I was at CalPERS. I saw this problem there and was actually working on solving it myself as a startup.
Right.
So we actually, my wife and I were working on it together. We pulled her out of her job. She was working on a whole business plan, working on funding. We had a few partnerships with people that we had decided to work with on developing ETFs. And Vivek actually came up with the exact same idea, started using some of the same partners. And so it was actually those partners that said, hey, there's two teams here that are actually working on the same idea. You guys should talk. And
What were you going to call yours?
It's going to be called Liberty Peer.
Liberty Peer.
Yes.
P-E-E-R.
P-I-E-R. And so that was a peer where we got married, Sandpoint, Idaho. It had Statue of Liberty. And we really thought that we were going to be liberating corporate America from constraints that the ESG movement had put on us, still what we're doing. Anyways, we met Vivek, the whole Strive team, and we were just really like finishing each other's sentences. It was like, okay, like we're literally doing the same thing. Let's do this together. Because it's one of those things where this is really about restoring, promoting capitalism, meritocracy, trying to create a major movement to change the largest corporations in America. It's not about competing against one another here. It's about winning something that is so important for not only just America as a whole, but also for people's retirement accounts, investment accounts. And so we teamed up.
Yeah. Wow. That is such a neat story. And I encourage everybody to tune in to the other podcast if you would and listen to it. And like I said, if you're not familiar with the story, then reach out to me personally and I'd be happy to share it or listen to the podcast, or just go to YouTube, search for Strive Asset Management. There's lots of interesting videos on there that you can watch. But well, I think we've shared some good insights here, and I really appreciate your time and you telling your story, and for you coming here and the candor and the good conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please subscribe to our channel. You can find more of our episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And check us out at uptickpartners.com, where you can learn more about how we help breakaway advisors just like yourself find independence.